The heat shimmered above the dust-choked square of Redemption Gulch, a miserable town that had long forgotten the meaning of its name. On a crude wooden platform, a woman stood, her dark skin a stark contrast to the faded calico dress forced upon her. Ilara. Her chin was high, though a tremor ran through her slender frame, a silent testament to the fear she refused to voice. Around the platform, a crowd of leering, sun-beaten faces gathered, their eyes glinting with a predatory light. Silas Blackwood, the town's self-appointed king, a man whose girth was matched only by his cruelty, paced before her, his voice a greasy drawl. "Gentlemen, a rare bloom in this desert. Strong, young, and look at that fire in her eyes. She'll fetch a fine price for any man looking for diligent service." His laughter was a raw, ugly sound. From the shadowed archway of the dilapidated cantina, Caleb watched. His face, weathered as an old saddle, was impassive, but his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, missed nothing. The cheap whiskey in his glass was bitter, but not as bitter as the memories Silas's words churned up. A different woman, a different auction of human misery, a time when he had stood by and done nothing. The guilt was a cold stone in his gut, a constant companion these last 15 years. He'd come to Redemption Gulch seeking nothing but solitude, a place to let the ghosts of his past slowly fade. But the ghosts, it seemed, had followed him, or perhaps they resided in every town where injustice festered. The bidding began, a chorus of crude remarks and pitiful sums. Ilara flinched with each offer, her gaze sweeping the crowd, searching for a flicker of humanity and finding none. Silas played to the rabble, his words painting her as less than human, a commodity. Caleb's hand tightened around his glass. He hadn't sought this. He had come to the end of the line, or so he thought, to simply exist until he didn't. But the sight of her, the echo of his own profound failures, it scraped something raw inside him. He remembered the promise he'd made to his wife, Sarah, before the war took her, before it took everything, that he'd always stand for what was right, no matter the cost. He'd broken that promise 1,000 times over in the silence of his regrets. Silas was about to bring down his makeshift gavel, a heavy, stained cudgel. "Going once to a Mr. Jebediah for $20 silver. A steal, I tell you." A grimy hand reached out. Just as Silas's arm began its descent, Caleb's voice, raspy from disuse and whiskey, cut through the expectant hush. 500. The words hung in the oppressive air, heavy and unbelievable. Every head turned. Silas froze, his piggy eyes narrowing as they found Caleb in the shadows. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. $500 was a fortune in a place like this, more than most of these men saw in a year. Caleb pushed himself away from the wall, emerging into the harsh sunlight. He was lean, almost gaunt, his clothes worn, but there was an undeniable presence about him, a stillness that spoke of coiled strength. He walked towards the platform, his gaze locked with Silas's. He unslung a heavy leather pouch from his belt and tossed it onto the platform. It landed with a dull, metallic thud. "Gold," Caleb stated, his voice flat. "Count it." Silas's shock slowly morphed into a furious scowl. This drifter, this nobody, had just humiliated him, challenged his authority in front of the whole town. But the weight of the pouch was undeniable. One of Silas's thugs, a hulking brute named Pike, hesitantly opened it, his eyes widening at the sight of the gleaming coins. He looked at Silas, nodding slowly. The tyrant's face was a mask of constrained fury. He wanted to refuse, to fight, but the sight of that much gold, and the sudden, unreadable intensity in Caleb's eyes, gave him pause. There was something dangerous about this stranger. "The woman is yours, drifter," Silas spat, his voice dripping with venom. "But you'll regret this day." Caleb ignored him. He looked at Ilara. Her eyes, wide and searching, met his. He saw fear, confusion, but also a flicker of something else, a desperate, fragile hope. He gave a curt nod towards the edge of town. "Come." He turned and walked away, not waiting to see if she followed, the weight of every eye in Redemption Gulch burning into his back. He knew this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Caleb led Ilara to the only place he could offer sanctuary, a collapsing livery stable at the edge of the parched, forgotten town. The air inside was thick with the smell of old hay and decay. He offered her a canteen of water, his movements economical, his face revealing nothing of the turmoil within. He was a man who had cultivated silence as a shield, and years of solitude had made him adept at keeping his thoughts locked away. He hadn't bought her for any nefarious purpose, he had bought her because the alternative was unthinkable, because her defiant gaze in the face of such degradation had pierced through the calloused layers of his apathy. It was an impulse, a spark of the man he once was, fanned by the ever-present ache of past failures. Ilara drank greedily, her eyes never leaving him. She'd seen men like him before, quiet men who carried violence like a second skin. She expected demands, or worse. But he simply sat on an overturned bucket, cleaning his worn peacemaker, the silence stretching taut between them. "Why?" she finally whispered, her voice hoarse. Caleb didn't look up. Didn't like the auction. His internal landscape was a storm. He'd spent nearly everything he had. For what? To drag himself back into the kind of trouble he'd spent a lifetime trying to avoid? He felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on him, a burden he thought he'd shed. Just as a fragile understanding began to form, the stable doors burst open, slamming against the decaying wood. Silas Blackwood stood framed in the entrance, flanked by Pike and two other rough-looking men, their faces contorted with malice. "Enjoying your purchase, drifter?" Silas sneered, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered pistol. "I told you you'd regret crossing me. That woman ain't yours to just walk away with. She represents an investment." Caleb rose slowly, placing himself between Ilara and the intruders. "The transaction was public. She's free." His voice was low, but it carried a deadly calm. "Freedom's a funny thing out here, drifter," Silas chuckled, a humorless sound. "It usually comes at a higher price than you paid." Pike took a step forward, flexing his meaty hands. "Maybe we just take her back, boss. And teach this fool a lesson about minding his own business." Caleb didn't flinch. His eyes, cold as chipped flint, darted between the men. He knew this was coming. He'd seen it in Silas's eyes at the auction. He didn't think. He just moved. As Pike lunged, Caleb sidestepped with surprising agility, his hand a blur. He didn't draw his gun, instead, he used its heavy barrel to connect sharply with Pike's wrist. A sickening crack, a howl of pain, and Pike's own gun clattered to the dirt floor. The other two thugs hesitated, surprised by the drifter's speed and precision. Silas, however, was enraged. "Get him," he roared. But before his men could react, Ilara, who had seemed frozen in fear, moved with a desperate swiftness. She grabbed a rusted pitchfork leaning against a stall and lunged, not at the men, but at the lantern hanging precariously from a low beam near Silas. The pitchfork connected, sending the lantern crashing to the dry hay below. Flames erupted instantly. "Chaos!" Silas cursed, backing away from the spreading fire. His men, caught between the blaze and the unexpectedly formidable drifter, looked uncertain. "This ain't over, you hear me?" Silas screamed over the crackle of flames, his face illuminated by the growing inferno. "You'll burn for this." He and his men retreated from the rapidly engulfing stable. Caleb grabbed Ilara's arm. "We need to go." Now they scrambled out through a back opening just as the roof timbers began to groan. Outside, hidden in the deepening twilight, they watched the livery burn, the flames a hungry orange beast devouring Caleb's meager shelter. Ilara was breathing heavily, soot smudging her face, but her eyes held a new fire. "Thank you," she said, looking at him with a newfound respect. Then, the twist. "They weren't just after me because I ran," she said, her voice urgent, low. "I was a clerk for Judge Alistair Thorne. He owns this town, Silas is just his dog. Thorne, he's into terrible things. Debt slavery, forging land deeds, silencing anyone who questions him. I found his ledger. Real records of his crimes. I was trying to get it to the federal marshals in Prescott when Silas caught me." Caleb stared at her, the pieces clicking into place. Judge Thorne. The name was a venomous whisper from his past. Thorne was the man whose predatory lending practices, cloaked in legality, had driven Caleb's own family off their ranch decades ago, setting in motion the chain of events that led to their deaths and his own broken existence. The loss of his parents, his sister, it all traced back to Thorne's insatiable greed. This wasn't just about saving a stranger anymore. This was about a reckoning. The fire in the stable was nothing compared to the one now raging in Caleb's soul. The ashes of the livery stable were still warm when dawn broke, painting the desolate landscape in hues of grey and blood orange. Caleb and Ilara had moved under the cover of darkness, finding temporary refuge in a shallow arroyo miles from Redemption Gulch. The revelation of Judge Thorne's involvement had transformed the situation from a reckless act of mercy into a deeply personal vendetta for Caleb, a chance to confront the architect of his family's ruin. But the path to Thorne was paved with Silas Blackwood and his thugs, and now, with the stakes infinitely higher, Caleb felt the crushing weight of an impossible choice. He could see it clearly, two paths diverged before him. One led deeper into the violence and danger, a path of confrontation that would inevitably demand blood, Silas's, Thorne's, perhaps his own. This path might lead to justice for Ilara, and a sliver of vengeance for himself, but it was fraught with peril and the near certainty of more lives broken. The other path was the one he'd trod for years: disappear. Take Ilara, ride hard for the territories, and vanish into the anonymity of the frontier. It was the path of self-preservation, the coward's way out, some might say, but it was also the path that might keep them both alive. He looked at Ilara, huddled against the cold morning air, her face etched with exhaustion but also a fierce determination. She clutched a small, oilskin-wrapped package to her chest, Thorne's ledger. She'd retrieved it from its hiding place before Silas had caught her initially. That ledger was her hope, her weapon, and now, their shared burden. His internal monologue was a battlefield. The warrior in him, long dormant, yearned for the fight, for the chance to make Thorne pay. But the weary survivor, the man haunted by too much death, craved escape. He remembered the faces of his fallen comrades in the war, the hollow eyes of his dying sister. Violence begot violence, a relentless, consuming fire. Could he truly walk that path again, even for a cause this just, this personal? Silas, no doubt under Thorne's explicit orders, would be hunting them with renewed ferocity. They wouldn't just be looking for a runaway servant now, they'd be looking for a witness and the evidence that could bring down a powerful man. The entire region, bought and paid for by Thorne's influence, would become hostile territory. They were utterly alone. Or so it seemed. Later that day, as they scouted for water, they were cornered. Not by Silas, but by one of his men, the young one, barely more than a boy, named Billy. Caleb had seen fear in Billy's eyes during the auction, a discomfort that set him apart from the other hardened thugs. Caleb prepared for a fight, but Billy held up his hands, his face pale. "I ain't here to fight," Billy stammered, his gaze darting around nervously. "Silas, he's gone mad." Thorne called him. "He wants you both dead, no questions. Said the ledger is everything. He's offering a huge bounty." Billy swallowed hard. "Silas, he killed old Jebediah, the one who bid on her. Just for being there, for being a witness." Said it was a message. The casual brutality of it sent a chill down Caleb's spine. This was the world Thorne had built. Billy shifted uncomfortably. "My pa. Thorne ruined him 2 years back. Took our farm. Pa never recovered. I signed on with Silas 'cause I needed the money, but this ain't right." He looked at Ilara. "That ledger, if it can stop Thorne. I can tell you where Silas is holed up. Give you a chance, an unexpected alliance, born from shared suffering." But it presented Caleb with his starkest moral crossroads yet. Billy's information could lead them straight to Silas, offering a chance to neutralize Thorne's primary enforcer. He could take Silas out, remove the immediate threat, perhaps violently, ensuring their path to Thorne was clearer. Or he could use the information to evade Silas, to run faster, further. The temptation to end Silas, to deliver a swift, brutal form of justice, was strong. It would be a decisive act, a message to Thorne. But it would also mean embracing the very darkness he'd fought so long to escape. His hand instinctively went to the peacemaker at his hip. The cold steel felt familiar, an extension of an old, unwelcome part of himself. If you were Caleb, standing at this precipice, with the chance to eliminate a clear and present danger through violence, a man who represented the brutal arm of the one who destroyed your past, what would you do? Would you embrace the killer within for the sake of a greater justice, or would you seek another way, risking everything on the hope that mercy might somehow prevail against such entrenched evil? Tell me in the comments below, what path would you choose for Caleb, and why? The revelation from Billy underscored the true scale of the fight. Judge Alastair Thorne wasn't just a local power, he was a cancer, his influence spreading through the territory, corrupting everything it touched. The ledger Ilara carried was more than just damning evidence against one man, it was the key to exposing a wide-ranging conspiracy of greed and oppression that had choked the life out of countless families like Caleb's, like Billy's. The stakes had risen from a personal rescue to a battle for the soul of the entire region. Caleb's gaze, hard and unwavering, met Billy's. He saw the fear, yes, but also a desperate sincerity. He made his choice, not with a bullet, but with a quiet intensity that was perhaps more unnerving. "We won't kill him, Billy," Caleb said, his voice raspy. "But we will stop him." And then we stopped Thorne. It wasn't the path of immediate, violent retribution he might have once taken, but a harder, more complex route. Ilara watched him, a silent understanding passing between them. Her courage had, in part, rekindled his own, but it was her unwavering belief in justice, not just vengeance, that was subtly reshaping his hardened resolve. Billy, visibly relieved yet still terrified, gave them the details of Silas's current hideout, an abandoned mine superintendent's office a few miles north, well defended but with a hidden access tunnel he knew from his childhood. The plan began to form, not one of direct assault, but of strategic infiltration and acquisition. The primary goal was not Silas, but what Silas might have: information, resources, or perhaps a direct link to Thorne that they could exploit. More importantly, they needed to create a diversion, a window of opportunity to get Ilara and the ledger to Prescott, where she believed a newly appointed, and hopefully incorruptible, federal marshal named Elias Vance was stationed. Billy, his loyalty now fully shifted, offered to create that diversion, a dangerous proposition. "Silas trusts me enough not to watch me too close. I can start a fire. Draw them away from the main road south." It was a near-suicidal offer, but his eyes were set with a grim purpose. The thought of an unexpected ally, however green, was a sliver of hope in the overwhelming darkness. The greater conspiracy Thorne orchestrated was becoming clearer. It wasn't just land grabs, it was a network of corrupt officials, bought-off sheriffs, and enforcers like Silas, all designed to funnel wealth and power into Thorne's coffers while maintaining his veneer of respectability as a high-standing judge. The ledger in Ilara's possession detailed these transactions, named names, and mapped out the tendrils of corruption. It was dynamite. As night fell, they approached the mine. The superintendent's office was a dilapidated stone building perched on a rocky outcrop, lights flickering in its windows. Billy, pale but resolute, slipped away towards the main mine entrance, promising to start his diversion in an hour. Caleb and Ilara found the hidden tunnel Billy described, a narrow, damp passage that smelled of earth and old decay. It led them into the cold, dark underbelly of the office building, emerging into a dusty storage cellar. Above, they could hear the rough laughter and clinking glasses of Silas and his men. The tension was a living thing, coiling in Caleb's stomach. He was willingly walking back into the fire, but this time, he wasn't alone, and his purpose was clearer than it had been in years. Ilara, beside him, was no longer the frightened woman on the auction block. She was a woman fighting for her life and for a justice that had long been denied to many. Her quiet strength was a steadying presence. They found what they were looking for not in the main office, but in Silas's private quarters, the strongbox. It was locked, of course. Caleb, using skills he hadn't employed since his days as a soldier navigating enemy lines, examined the lock. It was crude. A piece of wire from Ilara's torn dress, a few tense minutes of manipulation, and the lock clicked open. Inside, amongst some cash and personal effects, was a smaller, leather-bound book, Silas's own accounts, detailing payoffs from Thorne, lists of problems dealt with, and, crucially, correspondence hinting at Thorne's next big move, a plan to seize control of the Azure River water rights, which would bankrupt every small rancher downstream, including, ironically, the land where Caleb's family ranch once stood. Just as they secured this new evidence, a shout from outside pierced the night. Fire! Fire at the old shaft! Billy had done his part. Chaos erupted above. Footsteps pounded, voices yelled commands. This was their chance. But as they prepared to retreat through the tunnel, the cellar door creaked open. Silas Blackwood stood there, a sawed-off shotgun in his hands, his face a mask of cold fury. "Thought you could sneak around in my own place, drifter? And you, girl, you've caused me more trouble than you're worth." He'd been more cunning than they anticipated, perhaps leaving one man behind, or his own paranoia keeping him alert. The climax was upon them, not in the grand arena of Thorne's mansion, but here, in the dirt and shadows, with the architect of so much local misery. The standoff in the cellar was thick with a deadly silence, broken only by the distant shouts and the crackle of Billy's diversionary fire. Silas Blackwood's eyes, glinting in the dim light filtering from the open door, were fixed on Caleb and Elara. The twin barrels of his shotgun looked like dark tunnels leading to oblivion. "Hand over Thorne's ledger, girl," Silas growled, his voice low and dangerous. "And that little book you just took from my box. Do that, and maybe I'll let the drifter walk away." Maybe Elara clutched the oilskin package tighter. Never her voice, though strained, held no tremor of capitulation. Caleb subtly shifted his weight, his mind racing. He had one pistol, Silas had the shotgun at close range, a deadly equation. He needed an opening, a distraction, anything. "You're just Thorne's dog, Silas," Caleb said, his tone deliberately goading. "He throws you scraps while he feasts. When this is over, he'll hang you out to dry with the rest of his trash." Silas's face tightened, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes before raw anger took over. "Thorne pays well. And he always wins." He gestured with the shotgun. Now, the ledgers, just as Silas tensed, preparing to escalate, a muffled explosion from the direction of the fire rocked the ground, followed by intensified shouting. Billy's diversion had become more potent than planned, or perhaps something else had ignited. The momentary distraction was all Caleb needed. He lunged, not at Silas, but to the side, knocking over a stack of old crates filled with mining tools. They crashed to the ground with a deafening clang, tools scattering. Silas flinched, his shotgun wavering for a fraction of a second. Caleb drew his peacemaker, not firing, but using the instant to close the distance. He slammed into Silas, driving him back against the stone wall. The shotgun discharged into the ceiling, showering them with dust and debris. The fight was brutal, close quarters, a desperate struggle in the confined space. Elara, showing incredible courage, grabbed a heavy pickaxe handle from the scattered tools and swung it hard at Silas's legs, making him roar in pain and stumble. Caleb seized the moment, disarming Silas, the shotgun clattering away. He subdued Blackwood, not with a killing blow, but with a series of precise, incapacitating strikes that left the larger man winded and groaning on the cellar floor. They bound him securely with rope from the crates. "We need to get to Prescott," Elara urged, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Before Thorne realizes Silas is out of commission, they retrieved both ledgers. As they emerged from the tunnel, the distant glow of the fire was brighter. Billy was nowhere to be seen, and a grim fear settled in Caleb's heart for the young man's fate. They rode hard south, pushing their stolen horses through the night and the next day, avoiding towns, sticking to forgotten trails. Days later, dusty and exhausted, they reached Prescott. It was a larger, more civilized town than Redemption Gulch, but Thorne's influence, they knew, could stretch far. Elara led Caleb to a small, unassuming office, Elias Vance, U.S. Marshal. Vance was a younger man, his face serious, his eyes sharp and assessing as Elara, with Caleb standing silently beside her, laid out her story and presented the ledgers, Thorne's meticulously damning accounts and Silas's corroborating records. Vance listened intently, his expression growing grimmer with each revelation. When Elara finished, he looked at the evidence, then at Caleb. "Judge Thorne is a powerful man," Vance said slowly. "Respected. These are serious accusations, but there was a conviction in his voice that gave them hope. The climax came not with a gunfight, but with the quiet, inexorable power of the law, finally unshackled. Armed with the irrefutable evidence, Marshal Vance moved swiftly. Judge Alastair Thorne was arrested in his opulent study, surrounded by the trappings of his ill-gotten wealth, his face a mask of disbelief and sputtering indignation as the charges were read. His network of corruption began to unravel with astonishing speed. Silas Blackwood was found, still tied up, and brought to justice. Many of his gang scattered, others were rounded up. The news of Thorne's downfall spread like wildfire, a cleansing blaze through the territory. Weeks later, Caleb and Elara stood on a small rise overlooking a secluded valley, a clear stream gurgling nearby. The land was unclaimed, wild, but full of promise. Caleb had testified at Thorne's trial, his quiet words about the loss of his family ranch adding a deeply personal weight to the ledger's cold facts. Justice, slow and imperfect, had prevailed. Thorne and his key associates were convicted. Billy, it turned out, had survived, escaping the fire with minor burns and finding his own way to Prescott to testify. He was starting a new life, free from Silas's shadow. What now? Elara asked softly, looking at Caleb. The weariness was still in his eyes, but something else too, a nascent peace. He had confronted his past, not by erasing it, but by shaping a different future. We build, Caleb said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. He gestured to the valley. Something new. He had found a measure of redemption, not in vengeance, but in action, in protecting Elara, in helping to dismantle the very kind of injustice that had shattered his own life. Elara, no longer a victim but a survivor, a catalyst for change, nodded, her gaze hopeful. The sunrise painted the valley in gold, a new beginning dawning for them both, a quiet promise of healing under a vast, open sky. Their journey had been one of desperate survival, unexpected alliances, and the hard-won fight for justice. They had faced the darkness and emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, ready to sow seeds of hope in the soil of a new life. The fight for what's right often demands courage you didn't know you had. If their story of resilience and redemption struck a chord with you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next tale of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And now, for another story that will grip your heart, click on the video appearing on your screen.